Welcome to our third session of this morning. I think I've got that right. Just so you know, I have just had an indication of the back of the room. I think they are going to try and turn the air conditioning down in here. It's always hard. We either freeze you or we boil you, but we'll do our best to maybe go a bit on the cool side. Before introducing our panel, just a few housekeeping points I've been asked to flag, particularly because it's a panel session. It'd be great if you get your phones out if you want to ask any questions via the Slido app. We do also have roving mics, so if we get some discussion going, we're all prepped at the back and we might land up actually using the roving mics rather than Slido. Let's just see how things go. Shortly, I'm going to ask you two polling questions anyway, so it'd be good to have you up on the Slido. And we're in affiliation hub 1 and 2, if you're trying to work out on Slido where we are. So I have said all of that. And then to introduce our wonderful panelists today, we have right next to me, Natalie Bertelsen-Macey, who's Head of Pay and Reward at McCarthy and Stone. Then next to her, we have Juan Novoa, who's Director of Consulting at 3R Strategy. And then on the end, Ben Southworth, Reward Director of Mishcon de la Reya. And I'd like to especially thank 3R Strategy for sponsoring this panel today. So let's get going and get some poll questions up on the screens if we can. Just a bit of a scene setter, helpful for our panelists to see what your thinkings are. So if it is possible to get them up on screen, there we go. So the question is regulatory change pushing up your pay costs? So quite a broad question. So we're seeing at the moment there 80% of you, no, down to, okay, let's give you a little bit longer as more people answer that one. Put it this way, nobody said no, it's not pushing up your pay cost. 10% of you at the moment saying slightly up, 38%, so 4 out of 10 of you saying it's moderately, but just almost exactly half, 51% saying it is pushing up significantly. So a really big issue, all this regulation that's coming our way. If we can go on to the second polling question. So this one is, are you dealing with narrowing pay bands at your organisation? So are you finding, I think some people are finding that with the minimum wage coming in, there's a narrowing of the pay band. Some people are also concerned about that because of pay transparency and what's going to happen there. So that's something we're going to delve into in the panel discussion as well. So how many people we've got? 45 people have voted. So we can see probably about just over 1 in, all that, not yet, but it's coming. I think there's about a fifth of you thinking, yeah, coming. A third of you, 29%, not happening to you, and then almost half of you saying, yes, it is affecting you. So again, we'll touch on that in our discussions. So I think let's get going with letting our panel do the speaking, and let me sit down for a moment. What I've done is I've asked each panelist just do a very short 2-minute introduction to themselves and their organisation, but at the same time, tell us what the top 3 challenges are that they are dealing with right now. So obviously Ben and Natalie will be talking about within their own organisations, 2 very different organisations with different experiences. And then Juan is going to talk a bit more broadly about what he's seeing among his employer clients of the top 3 challenges. So I'm going to start with you, Natalie.
Thank you. So I'm Natalie Bertelsen-Macey and I work at McCarthy and Stone, so that is care and construction. And up until a month ago, I worked in New Look, which fashion retail, women's fashion retail. They're both quite similar and very different. So that means that they have really distinct populations with really different needs, but a significant population at the lower levels earning minimum wage. So legislative impacts for us have been huge in both roles. It means that the NI impact, bringing people into employers' NI that weren't paying it before, plus the increased costs have been huge. So budgetary impact has been there. Being able to attract when there's now a level playing field because pay can't be a differentiator. The narrowing of the pay band, so actually how do you motivate people outside of pay and create those progressions and that differentiation where there's been a traditional differentiation that has become eroded, so how do we manage that? And there's also just a bigger focus on reward. So justifying our spend, the senior exec are really interested in it now because it's such a huge cost to the business. And those three things add a little bit of pressure to the role, a little bit of challenge.
Thank you, Natalie. On to you, Ben.
Morning, everyone. I'm Ben Southworth. I'm the Reward Director at Mishcon Reya. We're a high-profile law firm in central London. Having worked at Mishcon for nearly 12 years now and in Reward for nearly 20, I think the three top challenges at the moment that we're experiencing, I think the first would be balancing business needs with financial prudence, I think is always going to be near the top. And what I mean by that is ensuring that we pay competitively, and our partners are always pushing for us to pay as much as we can to be able to attract and retain talent. But at the same time, we have to ensure that we maintain the integrity of our pay structures. I think secondly is the impact of the changed economic environment in which we are working. If I think back to kind of early on in my career in the 2008 financial crisis, what followed on from that then with kind of lower inflation, lower interest rates, and then subsequently what's happened over the last few years, it's completely flipped reverse, and with higher interest rates, cost of living crisis, how that's impacted our ability to attract and retain and our roles as reward leaders. And I think thirdly, around planning ahead during a time of such uncertainty in the world. I think the impact that has, we'll talk a bit more about kind of future planning and what that looks like. But I think, that's probably my top three at the moment.
Great. So Juan, what are you seeing more broadly across employers?
Thank you, Debbie, and hello, everyone. Juan, Novoa, Director of Consulting at Reya. We're a UK-based reward strategy, helping our clients with issues across the spectrum of reward. The three main topics that we are being asked about from clients, the first one would be pay transparency, and in particular, two questions. What does transparency mean for us? And are we ready for it? And especially that are we ready for it has triggered a lot of attention around the basics, so job architecture, pay structures, and all this. The second question, and both Ben and Natalie touched on it, is about affordability, value for money and reward. And the questions that are really about what does value look for us as an employer and what does value look like for our employees. And that brings into the conversation employee value proposition, and there's more impetus now around EVP. And the third point is really about pay progression and whether the current thinking around pay for performance is delivering what it needs. I think the general view is that very few organizations are getting it right. So what else is there? What is it that motivates our employees, and is our approach actually aligned to that? So those are the three main topics.
Fantastic. So we've unpacked our suitcase of the various things that we're going to be touching on. So let's try and delve more into each of those questions. So what we're going to do as a panel, we're probably going to talk for about 15 minutes or so, some pre-agreed questions, give you all time to think a little bit more. But then I'd like to open it to all of you if there are particular questions that you'd like us to address or that is a challenge at the moment. If you want to capture it on Slido, then it's caught there. I've got my phone so I can keep an eye on what's coming in on there. But as I said earlier, we've got roving mics as well, so we can take a view of how we want to open the discussion. But I want to start coming back to you, Natalie, because you're under pressure, but I'm sure your budgets are under pressure as well. So how are employers like you adapting your reward strategy to try and absorb or offset that financial impact of new legislation, such as the rising of the national minimum wage, the national living wage, national insurance? How are you thinking about it broadly?
So there are a few ways. I think reward with purpose is a thing, understanding why we're rewarding people in the way we are and making sure that we're getting value for money. So looking at our traditional ways of rewarding people, looking at the cost of those, actually, is our medical delivering what it needs to? Can we be doing that a different way? And making sure that we are spending our cash where we need to. How can we've got a lot that we must do, as I've said, with the legislation, but how are we investing the best in what we should do? How do we understand what that is and how are we justifying it? Because getting something through REMCO is a bit more challenging than it was before, so we've got to have real purpose, really use data-based insights to make those decisions and understand our colleagues really well as well, to understand what's going to have the impact. I think those are the biggest impacts that we've seen, doing more with less, I think.
Is there any particular area that you've done something on or has surprised
yes.
you?
So private medical is one that I've looked at because a lot of people have it. Not many people necessarily have claimed on it, although I've just come from a session which says that's not necessarily the trend across businesses. But actually, that value perception, PMI is quite expensive, but a cash plan can be a lot less expensive and actually utilised a lot more by employees. So you're less beholden to those policy increases and you're actually delivering a bit more value. So that was one of the things we looked at. Have to be really careful with salary sacrifice in my world because actually we have a lot of people at minimum wage. So what are the alternatives that we can offer that are just also delivering value? So if you're thinking of a cycle scheme, what are the discounting options that you can give rather than salary sacrifice? Those kind of considerations, and understand universal credit and the impact that cash has versus benefits, I think.
Yeah, really important. So Juan, same question to you. What do you see in terms of that broader, you talked about the EVP, but that broader reward strategy, what can you do to try and absorb those costs?
So we've seen a few tactical things, from changing pay structures to accommodate the new minimum wage levels. And there's a lot of conversation around whether there should be set differentials between people on those salaries and the next layer up, the people they report to, and a lot of the attention is centered on that. It gets really interesting when you ask the question, why are you doing that? And there's a sense that you should keep the difference and that if you don't, it's not fair. But when we've asked our clients, in some cases trade unions, or employees themselves, the answer keeps coming back to, well, if the people reporting on to me are almost on the same pay, why should I bother with more additional responsibility? So when you look at it from that point of view, that question, okay, what can we offer to that layer of first-line supervisors, looking at is career progression an option, incentives, benefits? So from that EVP angle, it's definitely something to look at from a very tactical point. Then there's the value question across all layers that we'll get into, I'm sure.
Okay. So, Ben, you've got a very different organisation, being a law firm, much higher paid, but you're also having to manage your pay budgets. How do you do that without compromising your business sustainability and that talent retention?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one in our sector. I think you've got to come at this with honesty, I think, in some of the conversations that take place. So, for example, there are literally thousands of law firms in the UK, each of which sets its salary in a slightly different place. But given the number in central London, there's a lot of competition in particular. So I think where we have potentially a lower billable hours target, for example, for our lawyers than certain other firms, means that we pay in a slightly different point in the pay range when we pull the data back from our benchmark provider to others. And actually it's been able to convey clearly why we're doing that. At the same time, I think it's around balancing kind of that competitiveness with the ability for pay progression as well. So in certain instances, a smoothing out of the kind of pay curve that we see that we get back from our benchmark providers. And all of that, I think, Juan mentioned around transparency previously. One of the things that we did last year off the back of the annual salary and bonus review was to actually go out into each of the fee-only departments and to talk to associate and managing associate representatives and actually myth bust and debunk some of those kind of rumours and myths that fly around the organisation, explain to people the philosophy of why we set salary, where we set salary, talk to them about what sits behind the bonus scheme, what are the factors that are taken into consideration. And it was amazing actually to see the response once they understood there was actually a science to this and there was a methodology that sat behind it. there was a much more positive, a much warmer response, shall we say. As a result, it's made things slightly more comfortable over the course of the last 12 months, but there's still a lot of work to do in that space.
I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Natalie, of how you're using your employee benefits as well to manage your budgets in that.
Yeah, I think, well, one of the things I'm very keen to do is to move away from the notion of just pure salary to total reward. And I know, I'm sure many organisations here are already doing this. We have a page on our benefits site, for example, labelled total reward, but we fill it with stories around why benefits are important at a particular time, which has its value, but we're not necessarily telling a full total reward story. So I think there's that. I think it's difficult though in our sector because there is such a fixation on salary, so there's a lot of work to do there. I think using salary sacrifice to offset, I mean obviously with the employer NI increase last year, I think we are keen to promote certain existing benefits. We're also keen to roll out new benefits, so we don't yet have an EV car scheme. I'm hoping that I'm going to get buy-in for that this year, so that will make a difference. And I think ultimately it's about telling compelling stories and understanding that different people at different age and stage, things are important. I never thought in my mid-40s, sorry, in my early 20s, I should have said that life assurance and pension would have been the most important things on my pension, on my benefits list, but that's certainly the case now. And I think we ran a session last year whereby we recognised that people weren't filling in things like expression of wish forms on their pension or their life benefits. And we set up a session called Caring for Your Loved Ones. And it was unbelievable, the number of people who came along, because it wasn't about them, it was about their families, and actually reacted to that. And it was all about fill in your expression of wish form. So I think it's telling a wider story than just the pay piece and ensuring that we come at things from a total reward perspective.
I'd like to move on a little bit now to touch on that collapsing of the pay progression, pay grades, and how you deal with that with the progression challenges. So I'm muddling it up there, and also that performance-related pay, which has been around forever, but it feels like that's all shifting and changing. So if I start with you, if that's okay, Juan. So you mentioned about performance-related pay becoming less effective if your pay grades are starting to shrink. What are the new mechanisms that are coming in to motivate people, to help people still progress in a world that's shifting quite a lot?
Sure. And, there's a big question there around affordability, value for money, which is where can we get the most for our spend? And there is a question whether all of those granular rating structures and then differentiating increases are delivering that motivational effect. And people are more attuned now also to what demotivates employees. And turns out with many of those structures, employees, they may fight for a 0.5% extra, and if they see someone who they regard as that they're not doing the same amount of effort as me and they get it and they don't, it's a big problem. Also, the concept of how we measure performance comes into play, that view of objectives at the start of the year, 3 to 1 appraisal, and then rating is coming under review because you're talking about reward with purpose. That conversation around what is the purpose of my role, not so much what are my objectives. It's really opening people to have more autonomy, to be more innovative. And then all that being the case, what do you do to reward them? So looking beyond performance into merit. And what does that look like? Should we look beyond the annual objectives and actually start looking more at the whole body of work of individuals, take into account how much ownership they take of their development, how they are growing, how they put to good use all their skills. And I think that's more attuned to how people think, how people feel motivated, and we can also control what demotivates them doing that.
So Natalie, same question.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think looking a bit more at the how people do things rather than the what they're doing has definitely seen a bit more movement towards that, and actually then measuring behaviours, because giving someone pay based upon a snapshot of performance that's totally variable, determined upon a line manager that you may or may not have a good relationship with, doesn't feel fair, and we should be moving more towards fairness and transparency. I think what we're seeing is differentiation, not just in pay, it's in what else motivates people. For care staff, they're probably not there just for the pay, because otherwise they'd probably be doing something else. But they're there to have impact. And so that is the thing that we can give them. We can give them really safe models to make sure that the care is the best where they're working. When I was in fashion retail, it was about product. They wanted to be with product. And so it was the other ways that we could reward them rather than just with pay. And then it's the opportunities to develop. So when we're saying the what and the how, actually, how are they growing as people? Do they understand how they're adding value to the business, and can they see their place in the organisation and how they contribute? So it's not about you've done really well, but this is how you've added value to the business, and this is how you're helping us grow, and this is how you'll be rewarded in the long term. So you can tie in bonus schemes and things like that tie in the behaviours, that tie in the business growth, and then it makes it a more holistic package that they're invested in.
So, Ben, you're also dealing with that pay compression, especially with the recruits among the graduate level lawyers. So how are you dealing with that collapsing pay grade and that progression up to partner?
I think a key thing to note here is that I think we're probably experiencing similar challenges to others who are experiencing it for slightly different reasons. So we're talking obviously about legislation and regulatory change. I think you're right. Ours is kind of more market driven, effectively, but the net effect is exactly the same. And so we see this. We talked about compression, but I call it the concertina effect, whereby pressure is applied by larger firms who increase their salaries. That then impacts on every other firm, and so what we see is kind of this increasing entry-level pay, if you like. For us, it's for the lawyers. The top of the market range doesn't tend to move out to the same extent that the bottom of the range does each year, and so you do get this compressed pay range. I think there it comes down to communications. Communications are crucial, as are relationships. And I think, again, in our roles as senior reward leaders, it's building and establishing those relationships internally with comms teams, but also with the business leaders to ensure that we're able to drive effective communications through the business, and actually to ensure that they're delivered by those leaders as well, who then own the communications as well. I think that's really important. We've been talking recently. I was at a leadership away day the other day. The term critical friend came up. And I think that it really resonated, because I think that's what we have to do in our roles, is to be that critical friend to those business leaders, to ensure that we're holding them to account, that those messages are being delivered. They can be crafted centrally, but that they are being delivered on the ground, I think is really important.
I see some questions are coming in on slide. I'm keeping an eye on those. So if anybody else has got anything to add, please do. I'm going to ask one more question and then start to weave in some of the audience questions as well. Juan, I want to come to you on this one about this need to remain competitive within the broader talent market, but at the same time to have that internal equity within your organisation. You're trying to manage that. We've got pay transparency and gender pay gaps and all of that kind of equity, but sometimes you've got to bring a hire in from external on a different rate. How do you balance that? What are people doing at the moment?
So the first thing is to really think about what being competitive means. And when you look to the career section on most websites, 80% of organizations say we offer competitive pay. That sets an expectation that I'm going to be paid ahead of the market. And people join, start looking at job adverts, and then they realize that's not the case. So having a clear narrative. Ben has been talking about telling the story. So telling that story up front, from that stage, about what being competitive means, where we want to position pay and whether that's a realistic aspiration. The second point around protecting internal equity and avoid that leapfrogging, it really is about making line managers and the business aware of the risks and the consequences of those decisions. I think historically we see many clients with line managers that just want to get that person through the door, get the result, and then throw the problem at HR, and then HR ends up looking like the bad person in this conversation. We often talk to them, you should be asking them, would you be comfortable defending this decision to your team? And how would you do that? So get them to think about these things is important. And the third aspect of this really is understanding if there's a real commitment to pay equity, and now equal pay as well. And organizations I think there's more awareness and attention to the risk of equal pay. Are you prepared then, if you want to get that person through the door, to adjust the salaries of other people doing the same or a comparable role? Because not only equal pay legislation, pay transparency will have an impact on that. So that plays also to the consequences and the financial impact of those decisions. And that's helped sort of manage that situation.
So building on this one, and I think I might come to you with this one, Ben, in the first instance. The slider moves around as people vote for questions, which is, I'm just going to find. How do we comply with regulations where performance, growth, etc., is subjective, so not data-based insights? How do you manage that subjective view that your line managers might have when you're setting pay?
It's interesting. We're talking about a challenge whereby people sometimes coming into an organisation or managers want to set salaries higher than your bands. I've also experienced it the other way, by the way, so I don't know about other people. So we did a merger in 2023 and we actually brought in people with lower salaries. So that was quite an interesting dynamic to know. I think the key, as Juan said, is talking about risk. I see there's an element of risk management in our roles and outline, although these, for example, in our organisations, the business owners ultimately will make the decisions. It's our job to advise, to ensure that people are aware of all of those risks, using data in the right way. I think data can be so powerful. We've always, we've talked a lot about data-driven decisions, putting the right information in front of people and informing those conversations. I think that's really important. And I think, look, you can red circle, you can use sign-on bonuses. These are all tools that are available. During review, sometimes it's just the art of negotiation, and it's, as I say, pulling on those relationships that you've established. We have the same department every year that goes particularly high during the salary review. Sometimes you have to name and shame. Again, it comes back to that being that critical friend, and if you've got to put it in lights in front of the board, then that's what you've got to do. That's your responsibility. We can't shirk it.
I've got a question, I think, that's got your name written all over it, Natalie. So it's about pay structures and frameworks and that sort of thing. So, in fact, the two questions from Ben, whoever Ben is in the room. So I'm going to ask them both because they might interweave slightly. So the bigger picture one is, can you elaborate on maintaining integrity of pay structures versus market forces, attraction and retention? How do you do that? And then if you were able to also, how do communications help with that pay band compression? Do you just explain to entry-level pay progressions are faster than others?
Okay, so I'm going to address the pay banding and job structure first because I think these are critical things. I think it's really important to have a pay structure and a job structure so that you can have robust conversations with people about why they earn what they do. And you should be structured so that you can have conversations with the business. So the discussion that we've just had about having a robust conversation with a manager, maybe. If you have those pay principles and those pay bandings, you have a reason why, and it removes perceived unfairness. So managing those, you have to really understand them. You need to understand the markets. You need to understand the data that's out there, because that's all benchmarking is data. And where you sit with that, and then you have to make a decision. Actually, are you in the 10th centile? Are you in the 75th centile? And it doesn't necessarily have to be the same across the business. You probably need to evaluate the risk of that particular department and that particular position, and have some flexibility. And then ranges rather than set pay rates in some areas. You can't do that with a shop assistant. That would be a nightmare. But actually, where you can, make sure you have a range so that you can position within that, so you are looking at experience and you know what your minimum is. Have really robust pay principles that every member of the SLT is signed up to, so that they don't go outside of it, and they have to have a really good reason to go outside of it so you can manage your budgets. Because we do have short-term people who need to come in, but you need to have a plan for that, because anyone who's over the pay band probably isn't going to stay very long. They've got nowhere to go. So all of those things can really help. And then it can help with the retention as well, because actually then you've got visibility as you're moving through those pay bands, and you've got good job evaluation. People know why they're paid what they're paid. They know what the next role is and what they have to do to get that next role, and you can really clearly discuss that with them. It is narrowing. But then so are the markets that we're comparing against, because we're not all alone in this. So you're seeing that narrowing of pay bands elsewhere. But don't just benchmark pay, benchmark benefits, get a total reward benchmark going so that you are analysing everything so you know how you're attracting and retaining. Can't remember what the second half of the question is because I've just
Oh, sorry. It was not fair of me. That was very bad chairing on my behalf, giving you two questions at once. So the next one is then how do you communicate about the progression? Do you just explain that to entry-level pay that you're going to progress faster than others?
So there are different elements. As I say, I've got some very different populations within that. Some have, if you're in retail or in care, you've got really structured progression. You've probably got a leaflet that's printed that says, this is how we work through the organisation. In the others, it's more about educating the managers and communicating through your business partners. You work really closely with your talent teams and your business partners so that they understand and they can work with you to talk to colleagues about that and to share the journey. Have some examples. Know who you're progressing through the organisation and have those lived stories so that people actually believe in it. So that it's not just, you're not paying lip service to it. There are people that they can touch in with who have actually worked through the organisation. And also, if you can, skills map. So that you're not just going, this is the progression through finance. There might be other progression routes. Understand where you've got some common skills, work with your business partners. So generally, communicate through the business, not just through your comms team.
I've got quite a few questions coming in now, so I don't know if either of you want to comment on that or I want to move on to pay transparency.
I'll just add a couple of things in terms of the integrity of pay structures, really understanding where flexibility is needed, where it can be objectively justified. We use our definition of pay equity is not everyone being paid the same, but having justifiable differentiation. So for pay integrity, understanding where you need that. And for communications, understanding that good communications is not just a policy somewhere on the intranet, but actually telling the story, linking that to your principles, to your values, and that's when it lands well.
So there's a good question that's just come in now, directed at you, Juan. Do you think we need to document more to keep an audit trail of how market forces, which fluctuate, have influenced decisions on pay?
Documenting would probably be the reactive approach to manage the risk. I think you can be proactive at that point and really having the right structure with the right degree of objective flexibility, understanding where differentiation in pay is required and can deliver the business outcome. What I do find in terms of keeping an audit trail, some clients choose to do that. If nothing else, that helps with conversations at more senior levels to understand the risks, where they're coming from and where things can or may go wrong and how to deal with those challenges.
And then, Ben, I'm aware that your competitors are often international, European-wide. What are you doing about pay transparency at the moment?
Yeah, it's a very interesting one. So we don't have any European operations. We do in Asia, but not in Europe. And so technically we don't have to participate. However, I think the reality is there are that many, as you say, that many of our competitors who will be doing this, that there's an optics thing here. And I think there will almost become an expectation. If it's not compliance, then it's expectation on organisations to publish that data. So that's certainly something that we're looking very closely at.
I'm not going to... I can ask you about pay transparency, but I don't think you're doing...
No, I'm UK only. Although I do think it's good practice. I just think it will come, and actually it's best practice for transparency so that people can aspire to the next level, and also so that job adverts, you can advertise at the right level, you're going to get the right candidates.
So just building on that, coming back to you, Juan, with, again, question coming from somebody, good question here. With increasing pay transparency requirements... sorry, this always moves just as I'm reading them. Oh, that one's disappeared. Amy, what did you do to my question? Okay, I'm going to move on because I can't remember what the rest of the question was. So, sorry, that's thrown me ever so slightly. Right, let me have a...
question was, with increasing pay transparency requirements, are we moving towards a more prescriptive way of setting salaries?
That was the question I was looking at.
There's a risk, but it's probably not the right way to go about it. I think we do need to start this session going back to basics. So from a job architecture point of view, what is the right grading structure for us? Can anyone explain how a grade C is different from a grade D and a grade E? So having something that makes sense, that you can communicate and that people can understand. And looking at the pay processes, having enough rigor to support consistency, but enough flexibility so that people don't find other ways around. And when people think, okay, we have something very tight, almost formulaic, it will solve all of our problems, reality shows that people just find the path of least resistance, try to find an allowance, try to get the role regraded, or many other things. So having enough flexibility helps you do that. And then communications, being very open when people understand how decisions are made, why they're made that way. Even if they don't agree with it, they understand, okay, that's it. That is fairness for us. It's okay. And it's likely that you'll have then to deal with the challenges that come when people don't understand, when there's not transparency, and when people think my pay is not fair. So it's more about having the right structure. But I think if you're overly prescriptive, there are also risks with that.
We've got a question about probationary periods. So Natalie, I'm going to throw this one at you and see what you'll think, but maybe go all down the panel. Do you think probationary periods will become more important and managed differently in the future in the context of all these changes?
That's a difficult one. So probationary period.
If you don't know, we can carry on down.
But no, I think it's really important because actually the cost of hiring is really high. If you think about the cost to replace, the cost to train, the time to interview, it's really important that we're getting the right people. So probationary periods are important. We don't want people to go after 6 months, but we've got to set better expectations up front of what a role entails, so the probationary period is actually about them settling into a role rather than testing whether it's right for them. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Juan, what would you say which way practice is going on probationary periods at the moment?
There's more noises challenging the concept. I don't think that we haven't seen a trend of people moving away in any way or form. There's more of a conversation around why do we have them and what is the message that we're sending. Going back to the whole employee value proposition, the messages that we want to send, probationary period sometimes send a message that we don't fully trust you. Okay, we're starting to date now, but I'm not sure I want an easy way out if I can't have it. So from that point of view, there are more conversations around it and what the real purpose. But in terms of actual practice, we haven't seen much of a move away from them yet.
I'm going to let you escape on that one, Ben, because the question's just come in on a topic that we discussed last week when we had a chat before today. Who knew we prepped this in advance? How do you manage new hires commanding higher salaries than existing loyal staff?
Ooh. Yeah, it's the perennial challenge, I think. And it's a really good question. I think, how do you manage them if it's them? I would suggest, how do you manage the situation regards new hires coming in sometimes on higher salaries? I think, as I say, I go back to the conversation we were having before. It's really important that business leaders understand the risk of going beyond the pay structures and again, down to us to ensure that as far as possible we're able to maintain the integrity of the pay structures for obvious reasons. But I think when it does happen, you've got to be very careful, I think, with where you bring people in. And I think I mentioned before, red circling, I've seen that happen. Bringing somebody in on a higher salary. I've seen people using sign-on bonuses, sometimes other kind of variable remuneration solutions to that as well. So I think there are a number of challenges there faced. Mm.
Another nice meaty one coming in about equal pay. And so again, I might start with you, Natalie, if that's okay.
So
I'll ask you the question, and then, so when we talk about equal pay, how do we go about explaining why colleagues doing similar work may be paid differently due to differing skills and experience?
And that's about the job evaluation piece. And it was massive last year with Next. And so how do you evaluate? What are your criteria that sets a job at a certain level? And then, do you know why you have the pay grade that you have? So job families, so job architecture being really important. Who are you setting against? And you have to be really clear about why you're paying the way you are. Using pay structures means that it doesn't see gender as long as it's job-based rather than individual-based. And share that. Let people know. Have really robust principles about being within those pay grades so that actually you can compare like with like. So yes, is it got leadership? Has it got communication? And it can be really challenging sometimes when you've got specialist teams comparing themselves with non-specialist teams, but they might have some really critical skills such as communication that are comparable when you're doing grading.
So what happens if you arrive in an organisation, I don't mind if somebody else takes this question, but where that isn't already in place? I'm sure there's a few people here going, that sounds brilliant. It's not what's happening where I am, and it's quite a big, knotty, hairy problem to deal with.
Then it's a case to sell it, just because I'm, very comfortable in this space right now, because actually I am arriving at a place where maybe this hasn't always been the case. And so going through with people to understand how they've evaluated the jobs, why are they where they are, and can we hold our hands on our hearts and say that that's the right thing, and then go through the process with them. The selling point is actually the budgetary control, because you're not going to be paying people above the odds if you're able to do that, and you're going to not face claims.
Juan, this probably comes up with a number of your employer clients. Where do you start, or what do you advise them when they've got to start off getting the right structures in place and has not been there previously?
So the right pay structure with the right job evaluation system, definitely first starting point of the job evaluation, making sure that it's something that you can be transparent about, that people understand, that people can see. And think to this particular question, when you get your job evaluation pay structure, there's always the aspects of the individual. And how do we make that objective judgment of this is why we pay this person doing the same or a similar job more, and we're comfortable with that. If you have competency or capability frameworks, that can give you a good objective basis to align those decisions. Two, if you're using pay for performance or other forms of merit, the criteria that you use to differentiate pay can give you an objective way of having that conversation. And then the important way is to have those processes in place, but also to get them across in a way that people can understand. It's not a technical reward conversation, but a human conversation. So getting that across and telling people this is why those differences might be there helps address that issue.
So we've only got 2 minutes left, so just do the last quick fire round of looking to the future. So this is the question I had right at the end to ask each of you. So I'll start with Ben on your side. What's the key trend or the key regulatory change or the key challenge if you're looking ahead in a bit of a longer timeline that's on your to-do list or it's on your agenda?
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot around transparency that we still want to do. It's been interesting hearing people talk about pay structures. We've got career frameworks in place, but we've never linked those to pay definitively. And again, it's interesting talking to counterparts at other law firms how different organisations within the same sector have differing approaches to sharing information with their people about what they're paid. So I think that's very high. I think particularly, as I mentioned before, the EU pay transparency piece, although we're not directly impacted, I suspect that there would be a clear indirect impact on us, and so we're going to need to do some work in that space. And I think just more generally, again, just an observation that thinking about the next period, whether that's 1, 2, 5 years, we in 2015 as a business put a 10-year vision in place. If you think about all the things that have happened since 2015, we've actually done pretty well, but we've been maybe arguably more realistic by setting ourselves a 5-year goal now going forward. And I think from a reward perspective, obviously it's so essential to align with the wider people vision, with those wider strategic business objectives, and I think fundamentally being flexible and being ready to adapt as and when things change, because inevitably they will.
Great, thank you. Quick one from you, Juan. What do you think people should have top of mind, challenge coming down the line?
EU pay transparency comes into force in a year's time in Europe, and just like gender pay gap reporting changed the conversation in the UK and the expectations of employees, we can see EU pay transparency having a similar effect. it goes much farther than legislation in the UK, and if the reasonable expectation that the UK may try to come close or mirror some of those aspects. So leaving it till the last minute may not be the best idea, understanding what the expectations are, how the demands and expectations for employees may change, and getting ready for it. See it as a big priority.
And Natalie?
Just a lack of predictability for me. I think I am not sure what's going to come down the line over the next few years, and that scares me a little bit, but I have to be really agile, ready to make those budgetary changes and just be really aware of the business impacts that I might need to support.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Let's give our wonderful panellists a round of applause. Thank you so much. That was a huge topic to try and cover. And I'd like to say a very special thank you to Juan and 3R Strategy for sponsoring this session. I'm going to do a tiny little plug. Those of you who are getting involved with the REBA Acumen pilot, which is free at the moment, the current survey is on EU pay transparency. Whether you're UK only, UK and Europe, or Europe, it's worth plugging in and get that, because you'll get that report as soon as you take part. So just as an aside. If anybody would like to have a chat to any of our panellists, I suggest perhaps just meeting outside the room, because they're going to change the room. But I think all of you, especially Juan, are able to hang around and answer questions and so on. There's a short 20-minute break before the next set of questions. I know some of you are going to visit the exhibition between now and lunchtime when it's quieter. Enjoy, and I'll see you later.